Welcome to the Foundational Security Architecture Podcast. Here, we explore security not just as a set of controls, but as a comprehensive system anchored by strong governance, informed risk management, and robust architectural practices. This space is dedicated to professionals seeking to deepen their understanding and elevate their approach to security as an integrated discipline. Let's begin.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're unpacking a topic that strikes right at the heart of how we work.
Right.
Specifically, we're looking at organizational architecture and the true nature of what we typically call friction.
Yeah, that dreaded word.
Exactly. And look, if you operate in any kind of complex environment, whether you're managing DevOps pipelines or steering corporate strategy or, just trying to get a cross-functional project over the finish line, you know exactly what this friction feels like.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone does.
It's that incredibly universal frustration that hits when you're moving fast, you've got momentum, and then suddenly, bam, you slam into a brick wall.
Right.
You initiate a deployment or a new workflow, and immediately you're hit with, a mandatory security review.
Or your project gets stalled in a multi-tier approval workflow that takes weeks.
Yes. Or you find yourself locked out by tedious identity and access control protocols. And the immediate visceral reaction we all share in that exact moment is just so universal. You just think, this is way too slow.
Make it go away.
Right. Remove the delay. It's too slow.
It really is the defining frustration of the modern professional landscape. I mean, you're hired to execute, you are measured on your velocity, and yet you spend half your time fighting the very systems designed to support your organization.
Yeah.
But when you examine the foundational architecture of these systems, which is the primary mission of our deep dive today, you begin to see that our standard knee-jerk reaction to these bottlenecks is fundamentally flawed.
Completely backwards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We look at an access control delay, and we think the objective is simply to remove the delay.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is where the core paradigm shift of this material really lives. The instinct is always to pressure the control, right? We complain to IT, we push back against the compliance team.
We escalate to a director.
Yeah, exactly. We escalate to a director to just get the roadblock out of our way so we can hit our KPIs. We view the delay as the ultimate enemy of our productivity.
And that assumption is precisely what this architectural analysis just completely tears down.
Yeah, it really does.
The foundational premise we're looking at here is that delay is rarely the real problem. In fact, delay is actually a signal.
A signal.
Right? It's a piece of telemetry. In corporate efficiency culture, we're taught to ruthlessly hunt down and eliminate delays. But if you treat a delay as an enemy to be defeated, rather than a signal to be interpreted, you are, well, you're essentially flying blind.
So if we accept that delay is a signal, the obvious question for anyone listening is, what exactly is it trying to tell us?
Right.
I mean, if a rigorous security check halts my product launch for 3 weeks, what is the signal there other than the fact that our time to market is taking a massive hit?
The signal is telling you that something within the organizational architecture is misaligned.
Misaligned.
Yes. That is the crucial concept to grasp here. A control, whether it's an automated compliance check, a budgetary review, or an identity verification gateway, it does not create friction on its own.
Right.
The control itself is completely neutral. It's just a mechanism executing its programmed logic.
I see the point, but I have to say, it certainly doesn't feel neutral when you are the one missing a deadline because of it.
No, of course not.
So if the control isn't the source of the friction, what is?
The friction occurs because the design surrounding that control completely fails to account for competing objectives.
Ah, competing objectives.
Yes. Think about the structural reality of a large enterprise.
Yeah.
You have an engineering team whose primary objective is speed and continuous delivery.
Right. Move fast and break things.
Exactly. And simultaneously, you have a security operations team, SecOps, whose primary objective is risk mitigation and zero trust verification. These are competing objectives.
They're inherently at odds.
Exactly. The friction doesn't manifest because the security team is incompetent or trying to ruin the product roadmap.
Yeah.
The friction manifests because the underlying architecture was never designed to reconcile the reality that the business demands both maximum velocity and maximum security simultaneously.
So when we experience that delay, we're just feeling the kinetic energy of those two competing objectives crashing into each other.
That's a great way to put it.
And because we usually misdiagnose that collision as just a slow process, we default to attacking the symptoms instead of the root cause.
Precisely. And the analysis points out exactly how that misdiagnosis plays out in our daily operations. When a control creates operational impact, teams typically resort to one of three immediate actions.
Right. The text is very specific about this.
First, they argue to permanently remove the control. Second, they find an executive sponsor to override the policy. Or third, they petition to add an exception to the rule.
I have to admit, I have absolutely been guilty of the third one.
I think we all have.
You hit a wall trying to push an urgent hotfix, and instead of questioning the pipeline, you just file a ticket saying, look, I understand the protocol, but this is a tier 1 outage, so can we just grant a one-time exception?
Yeah.
And it feels like you're solving the problem because, hey, the hotfix goes out.
You solved the immediate operational crisis, sure, but you completely ignored the architectural signal. It's the equivalent of noticing a check engine light on your dashboard, getting annoyed by the glare.
And just putting a piece of black tape over it.
Exactly. You relieve the immediate psychological pressure, but the engine is still misfiring. Every single time a team removes a control, overrides a policy, or adds an exception, they're leaving the underlying architectural misalignment completely untouched.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If I'm leading a team and my primary directive is to ship a product, I don't always have the luxury of halting production to redesign the entire company's operational architecture.
Fair point.
Sometimes removing the friction through an exception feels like the only pragmatic choice to keep the business running. I mean, isn't the whole point of modern agile methodologies to ruthlessly eliminate these kinds of bottlenecks?
See, that is a very common misconception, that agility means operating without constraints. True agility requires highly refined constraints. If you just strip away the controls without addressing why they were put there in the first place, you are building an agile system. You're building a fragile one.
A fragile one. Wow.
Yeah. The alternative to attacking symptoms isn't to just suffer through the delay. The alternative is shifting your focus to redesigning pathways.
Redesigning pathways. Let's dig into what that actually looks like in practice, because this is where the source material provides a really specific framework.
It does.
If a control wasn't framed to anticipate operational urgency, we have to start asking deeper structural questions. And the analysis lays out 4 critical questions that demand answers when you hit these misaligned bottlenecks.
Right. And the first of those 4 critical questions was risk tolerance clearly defined? This is where most organizations fail right out of the gate.
It is amazing how often risk tolerance is just assumed rather than quantified.
All the time.
If the executive board hasn't explicitly defined the acceptable blast radius for a given deployment, you are going to have friction.
Inevitably.
The CCOPS team operates under the assumption that the risk tolerance is absolute 0, so their architecture blocks everything anomalous.
Right.
But the DevOps team assumes the organization is willing to tolerate some minor bugs in exchange for market share, so they push to bypass the blocks. The argument looks like it's about a delayed pull request, but it's actually about a total vacuum of defined risk tolerance.
That is exactly right, which leads directly to the second critical question: were escalation pathways architected?
Right.
In any complex system where competing objectives exist, conflicts are mathematically inevitable. You cannot avoid them.
So you have to plan for them.
Yes. The question is whether you have designed a structured, deterministic way to escalate and resolve that conflict, or if your escalation pathway is just people arguing in a sprawling Slack channel or a heated email thread.
And if the escalation pathway is just whoever yells the loudest gets their way, that isn't architecture.
Not at all.
That is just organizational chaos masquerading as leadership.
Exactly. Which brings us to the third question, which tackles the reality of those urgent hotfix scenarios you mentioned earlier. The question is, were conditional models designed for high-severity scenarios?
I want to focus on this one because the concept of conditional models is incredibly practical. When we talk about conditional models in this context, we're really talking about things like break glass procedures and IT infrastructure.
Yes, fail-open versus fail-closed architectures.
Right. If you have a critical high-severity outage and your system has no conditional model for emergencies, what is the default human behavior? You just smash the glass anyway.
You have to.
You bypass the identity and access management roles, you hardcode credentials, you do whatever it takes to restore the service.
And doing so immediately violates compliance and introduces massive security vulnerabilities.
Right.
The architectural view argues that you should never have to break the rules in an emergency.
That's such a powerful idea.
A mature, well-designed architecture already has a conditional set of rules, a highly monitored temporary elevation of privileges, built specifically for that exact state of emergency. You aren't bypassing the architecture, you're simply shifting into a different, pre-designed pathway.
That makes perfect sense. And that naturally leads to the fourth critical question in this framework, which really closes the loop on those emergency pathways. Are there feedback mechanisms established to audit the control's impact?
Yes, the feedback loop.
If you use a break glass procedure, does the architecture automatically trigger a post-incident review to understand why the standard pathway failed?
Exactly. If you don't have that auditability, those temporary emergency exceptions quietly become the permanent standard operating procedure.
They just become the new normal?
Yes. And when you look at these four questions, defining risk tolerance, architecting escalation pathways, designing conditional models, and establishing audit feedback loops, you really see the core dichotomy of this entire philosophy. When delay is the focus, we attack symptoms. When architecture is the focus, we redesign pathways.
It is a phenomenal lens for evaluating your own operational habits. Next time you are frustrated by a workflow, you really have to ask yourself, am I just attacking a symptom right now, or am I actually doing the work to redesign the pathway?
It changes everything.
It really does. And this brings us to what I consider the absolute climax of this analysis. There's a specific concept here that completely rewired how I think about systemic efficiency. Here's the quote, "Mature organizations don't eliminate friction. They structure it."
They structure it.
Man, I love that.
It is a profound rejection of a very popular yet fundamentally flawed business utopia. We are constantly sold the idea, usually by software vendors, that the ultimate state of an enterprise is total seamlessness.
Zero friction.
Zero friction. But any systems engineer will tell you that a system with zero friction is a system that is entirely out of control.
We assume friction is a synonym for dysfunction, but the material makes a vital distinction here. Friction isn't dysfunction. Friction is diagnostic.
That word diagnostic completely flips the script.
Yeah.
In network engineering, if you experience latency, you don't just arbitrarily delete the load balancer to speed things up.
Right, that would be insane.
You use that latency as diagnostic telemetry to trace where the packet loss is occurring. The friction is working exactly as intended. It's highlighting the exact coordinate where your structural pathways need to be evaluated.
Right.
If you view organizational friction as mere dysfunction, your only goal will be eradication. But if you view it as diagnostic data, you will capture it, analyze it, and use it to build better systems.
And the danger of ignoring that diagnostic data is severe. If we just numb the friction, if we just constantly grant exceptions, bypass the IAM roles, and override the approval matrices, we aren't actually making the organization faster. We are just masking the failure points.
You're trading a minor, localized delay for catastrophic, systemic fragility. That is the stark warning embedded in this analysis. If you continuously remove delays without understanding the architectural context that generated them, you do not increase efficiency. You increase fragility. You're stripping the structural rebar out of the concrete just because it's heavy.
And the immediate results can be incredibly deceiving. You strip out the rebar, the concrete pours faster, and you look like a hero to your stakeholders.
Sure, for a minute.
Right. You ship the feature ahead of schedule. You close the enterprise deal without waiting for legal's red lines. But there is a haunting phrase in the material that perfectly captures the delayed consequence of this behavior. What looks like speed today often becomes drift tomorrow.
System drift. It is perhaps the most insidious threat to any complex organization, precisely because it doesn't happen all at once. Drift is the slow, imperceptible slide away from your established baseline of security, compliance, or quality. It's the normalization of deviance.
Let's break down how that drift actually materializes, because I think everyone listening has seen this happen but maybe didn't have the vocabulary for it.
Right.
You grant one exception for a developer to bypass a security pipeline because they're behind schedule. It seems harmless, just a one-off for speed.
But by granting that exception, you have signaled to the entire engineering org that the control is optional when inconvenient.
Exactly.
The next week, 3 more developers bypass the pipeline. Within 6 months, you have a sprawling shadow IT infrastructure, undocumented APIs, and massive accumulations of technical debt.
It snowballs.
It does. You didn't experience a sudden catastrophic failure. You just slowly drifted into a state of total vulnerability because you eliminated the structured friction that was keeping the system anchored.
You traded long-term structural integrity for short-term symptomatic relief. And the cost of reversing that drift, of trying to wrangle all that shadow infrastructure back into compliance a year later, is exponentially higher than the cost of the original delay would have been.
which is why mature systems intentionally design friction into their operations. They understand that speed without structure is just accelerated drift. They put guardrails in place, not to slow the vehicle down, but to ensure the vehicle actually stays on the cliffside road when it's moving at 200 miles an hour.
So as we synthesize everything we've explored in this deep dive, the overarching lesson requires a fundamental shift in how we interpret the daily operational roadblocks we all face. Remember that delay is not inherently your enemy. It is telemetry.
Yeah.
It's a signal pointing directly to a collision of competing objectives. Remember that friction isn't dysfunction. It is a highly valuable diagnostic tool. And most importantly, remember that truly mature organizations do not chase the illusion of a frictionless environment.
They structure their friction.
They structure their friction, they anticipate the tension between speed and security, and they do the hard work of redesigning pathways rather than just applying a Band-Aid to the symptoms.
It requires a massive shift in perspective, whether you're writing code, designing corporate policy, or leading a team through a complex transformation. You have to stop viewing constraints as punishments and start viewing them as architectural load-bearing walls.
The source material leaves us with a direct challenge, and it's a question I want to pose to you right now. Think about the workflows you manage, the approval chains you navigate, the systems you interact with every single day. Where in your environment are you treating symptoms instead of structure?
That's the core of it.
Take a moment with that. Where are you treating symptoms instead of structure? Where are you fighting to remove a delay or begging for a policy exception instead of doing the rigorous work of asking why that pathway was architected that way in the first place? Give that question some real estate in your mind this week.
And as you examine your own environment for those symptoms, there's one final critical implication to consider that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Okay, let's hear it.
If friction is genuinely diagnostic, and if delay is truly a piece of valuable telemetry, are you actually building systems to record and read those diagnostics? Or are you just feeling the heat of the friction, experiencing the frustration of the bottleneck, and then letting all of that highly valuable data vanish into thin air the moment the crisis is resolved?
Wow.
If a recurring delay is an alarm bell signaling an architectural misalignment, you don't just need to stop putting tape over the check engine light. You need a comprehensive automated system to actually capture, aggregate, and analyze what that bell is trying to tell you.
What a brilliant place to leave it. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Take these frameworks, start looking for the hidden signals within your own architectural bottlenecks, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to the Foundational Security Architecture Podcast. If this episode helped you see security with greater structural clarity, consider sharing it with someone responsible for protecting complex systems. Security is not a collection of controls. It is a design choice. Until the next episode, keep building with structure.